Chris was still asleep, but gradually waking up, he began to feel discomfort from the tightness, because of which his long legs were very numb. The protagonist finally began to understand what had happened to him and how he had ended up in the world of riders when he was awakened by a loud scream. Vanessa ran up to him, indignant that he was still in bed, and asked if he needed a special invitation from his aunt. Vanessa is a third-year high school student and a second-rank martial artist, the best in her school. Looking appraisingly at the dark-haired girl, the guy thought to himself that he had met that very horse. The girl boiled over, and her aura seemed to begin to blaze with indignation. Another beautiful dark-haired girl was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She smiled radiantly, noting out loud that the day had turned out to be simply wonderful. Her name was Monica. She was 34 years old. She was once an imperial wild horse, and also a knight of the Order of Centurion. She is a fourth-rank fighter. Sitting at the table, Monica, with a kind smile, asked Vanessa to be kinder to Chris, arguing that he was still the girl's brother, to which the hot-tempered Vanessa furiously replied that Chris was not her brother at all, but her sworn enemy, who at that moment was silently having breakfast. The eldest reminded the protagonist to go to extra classes after he ate, to which he agreed, even calling Monica Mom, while remembering that Vanessa was right and they were enemies. And even more than enemies, Chris became the killer of Monica's husband. 11 years ago, the Devil's Gates opened wide, and the entire empire united to drive the demons from their lands. Then the devil retreated, but left behind descendants, one of whom is Chris Hollywell, the son of the devil, a first-rank fighter. When the main character approaches the washstand, a glass filled with water flies in from somewhere behind and breaks on one of the still intact horns on the guy's head. Turning around, Chris noticed that it was Vanessa who threw a glass at his head. When the guy looked at her, the girl furiously screamed that the Empire should not have accepted people like him with open arms, and that she wanted him and everyone like him to die. Left alone with himself, the main character tries to find an explanation for the fact that his new sister hates him and calmly allows herself to call him a bastard. Suddenly, the young heir of Satan comes to the conclusion that no matter how strong people's hatred towards him, people never even try to deal with him directly. Chris continued to think, and his thoughts came to the question of his next actions. As soon as he thought about how the system should be activated, it immediately happened. The brunette was shocked and speechless, only frantically looking around. Having learned about his ability, the guy was delighted, because his ability was that he feeds on the energy of his opponents. Then he decided that he would no longer manage the entire household, and went in search of the inhabitants of the house. The cause of his death in his past life was a beating, after which he was hospitalized, but got into a fight with another patient, and eventually died of hypoxia. After examining the area, Chris noted with some pleasure that only Aunt Monica was home, and decided to try out the new ability on her. However, he did not expect that his aunt was not so simple. With a quick and deft movement, Monica changed the position to her side, putting the knife to Chris's throat and thus plunging him into shock. With a sweet smile, and as if nothing had happened, the aunt tells the son of Satan that she does not need his help now, without removing the sharpest knife from his throat. Having used the system, the main character finally understands how it works, and the amount of hatred radiating from his aunt towards him simply stunned the guy. He bowed in an apologetic gesture, still in shock, and he rushed away headlong, thinking only about how he could escape from the cold-blooded madwoman alive. Having hidden in a safer place, the boy stopped to catch his breath, still horrified by the level of hatred Monica showed towards him. But despite the shock he experienced, the main character was satisfied as he increased his accumulated energy level to 1,350. Chris starts to think of ways to accumulate new energy, and an idea comes to him to hang around his aunt more. However, the brunette immediately rejects it, because he decides that this way, he would rather say goodbye to life than accumulate energy. After some thought, the son of Satan decides that he has no choice but to retreat and comes to Vanessa's room, under the pretext of talking. At that moment, the girl was changing clothes, and when she saw the man who entered, she blushed deeply and let out a piercing squeal. Chris looked momentarily embarrassed, but then calmly stated that his new sister should not hide anything from him. In order to absorb as much energy as possible, Brunette decided to excite and anger Vanessa even more. And to do this, he declared with the most smug look that his pectoral muscles were much larger than the girl's breasts. At that very second, a powerful blow flew into the guy's stomach, knocking all the air out of his lungs at once, and a red stream flowed from his mouth. Regardless of the extent of her opponent's injury, Vanessa continued to strike with fury. It was not for nothing that she considered Chris her punching bag. But despite the strength of her anger, the brunette managed to absorb very little energy. So despite the pain, he again began to add fuel to the fire of the flaring girl, bringing her condition to a roaring, raging, and destroying everything in its path flame. Chris wanted to get more energy, so he told the already extremely angry girl that he was waiting outside the door on purpose until she started changing. Having very loudly and emotionally asked her newly made brother if he wanted to die right now, and having promised to help him with this, the dark-haired girl knocked the main character out with her foot. After the last blow, the brunette was no longer able to get up right away, but he absorbed 500 units of energy at once, which left him quite pleased. Suddenly, someone called him, and Chris broke out in a cold sweat when he saw Monica standing in the doorway, with a clearly unkind look, asking what the guy was doing in her daughter's room at such a late hour. The protagonist felt extreme self-hatred from her and absorbed 114 units of energy. He decided that now was the time to get out of there, so he said goodnight to the girls and carefully and quietly slipped towards the exit. Meanwhile, Vanessa, extremely upset, asked her mother if what had happened was an unsuccessful joke by her so-called brother, having hidden from his mother and her daughter, who were dangerous to his life and health. The son of the devil decided to test his strength and stabbed himself in the stomach with a knife, and the steel shattered into small pieces. The next morning, Chris went to school and suddenly realized that he had found the very epicenter of energy. Then he stood in the middle of the corridor, attracted everyone's attention with a loud cry, and showed the middle finger to a whole crowd of onlookers who had gathered at the cry. He fed on their energy and even began to love going to school. The main character was walking down the corridor when he was called from behind. The boys' class teacher, a charming blonde, Vivian Adams, a goddess teacher at the high school, called him and asked about his well-being. Suddenly, Chris felt an increase in hostile energy around him and quickly realized that it was coming from the jealous men and boys around him. Then the main character decided to pretend to faint in order to absorb more energy from the opponents around him. With a pitiful look, he fell face down right on the teacher's chest. A frightened Vivienne decided to take the boy to the infirmary so that the doctor could see what was wrong with him. The protagonist says something about not wanting to see a doctor, right into Vivienne's chest, causing her to be confused and worried, and the crowd of guys to be shocked and furious. Then Chris added that he was not physically ill at all, but was wasting away from love, which immediately increased the hatred level in the crowd around him, which the guy was quite pleased with. After classes ended, the main character sat down on a bench to wait for Vanessa to come home from school. Suddenly, the same group of guys approached him from behind. They put a bag over the head of the devil's son and started beating him. But Chris, having accumulated strength, was already able to calmly repel the blows of the enraged crowd. At that moment, Vanessa was passing by. She saw that a crowd of large guys were dealing with her hated brother, and she rushed to save him, shouting that no one but her was allowed to beat him. However, the strength of the gathering of muscle bags and one girl were not equal, and she was immediately thrown aside without even being noticed. But the appearance of her voice among the others gave the main character strength. Having thrown everyone aside, Chris rose to his feet and tore the bag off his head. Having confirmed that it was indeed Vanessa who had come to his aid, he was somewhat surprised by this. While bringing the girl to her senses, Chris pretended that she hadn't gotten into trouble because of him, because he was afraid that Monica would kill him if she found out about everything. However, when he found himself very close to the girl, the main character felt that she emanated very little hatred towards him, which surprised him immensely. Vanessa didn't come to her senses for a long time, so the brunette threw her on his back and carried her home, continuing to think about how strange a girl she really was. In the following days, the life of the devil's son became much calmer. Vanessa even defended him in front of his mother, saying that she was distracted during training and missed a couple of punches due to her own fault. And the main character continued to collect hostile energy in the school, deliberately getting on the nerves of all its inhabitants. One fine day, Chris came to school, but to his surprise, there was no one there. But then he realized that there was a competition going on at school. He then ran towards the noisy crowd of spectators to absorb as much energy as possible around him. The entire crowd was fervently supporting Vanessa, shouting her name, which surprised the brunette. Here, Vanessa was thrown out of the ring with a powerful blow. Seeing this, the devil's son rushed headlong towards the ring to catch the girl who was rapidly flying down. Chris managed to catch Vanessa before she made a very painful impact with the floor. He gave the loser's opponent an unkind look, who in the meantime declared himself the strongest in the entire school and mocked Vanessa. His name was Max Fall, and he was the heir to the White Dog Company. The crowd was extremely surprised by the defeat of the local strongwoman, while Chris was simply indignant. The next morning, Chris and Vanessa left the house together, and the former noticed that the girl was dressed in a knight's costume, which he asked her about, to which she simply waved it off and said that by the evening she would already join the ranks of the knights. The school was holding the final round of the class representative elections, and before the fight began, Miss Adams reminded Vanessa and Fall that friendship should always come before competition. Competing for the title of class representative is Vanessa Evans, the heir to the chief knight and a second-year high school student. And against her is Max Fall, the heir to the White Dog Company, a student in the same class. The duel began, and passions once again boiled over with furious force. Vanessa jumped high to deliver a powerful blow to her opponent, stunning him. Max then decided to use a sneaky trick and created magical armor to protect himself from possible damage from Evans. Having made this backup, he hoped to use his speed to get a head start and attack the girl, not counting on her being able to anticipate and get ahead of his actions. She also used magic and made a mounted knight's strike, jumping on her opponent from above with her legs, which took the form of horse hooves. With this, she knocked her opponent down and solemnly declared herself the winner. Enjoying her easy victory, the girl turned her back to the loser, which was a mistake, as the next second she received a powerful blow from behind and flew out of the ring. Miss Adams spoke to Mrs. Evans at the Evans home and told her that she had been unable to remove Fall from the tournament. Vivian also added that all that is within her competence is to transfer Vanessa to another educational institution if she wants it. The teacher turned to Monica Centurion several times, expressing her regret that she could not help Evans's daughter, but she interrupted the teacher by taking a thin white cigarette from a pack. Taking a lighter out of her pocket, the knight lit the end of a paper tube of tobacco and lit it, after which she continued speaking and asked Vivian not to call her that, because this title had been banned from being pronounced 10 years ago. With a cigarette between her teeth, the brunette asked if the teacher had done everything possible to ensure Vanessa's victory. The blonde assured that she had made every effort to ensure the victory of the knight's daughter, and added that it was impossible to forbid the pronunciation of such an honorable title. Mrs. Evans told the teacher that her daughter remembered the events of 10 years ago too well, and that she had to promise her daughter that if she won, Monica would do everything possible to ensure that Vanessa was accepted into the Order of Knights. The knight blew out another cloud of pungent smoke, and feeling a little sad, as she remembered that her daughter was now broken, sitting in her room with a broken leg and mourning the lost victory, she finished speaking, mentioning out loud that Vanessa had lost. Monica rose to her feet and, finishing her cigarette, thanked Teacher Adams for the information and said that it was already late evening and Vivienne should go home. Leaving the room, the blonde ran into Chris, who offered to walk her, to which she surprisingly agreed. When the heroes reached Adam's house, she thanked Halliwell, but he interrupted her. The brunette asked the teacher if Fall would really now be the senior student representative. She sighed and replied that if no one beat him by noon tomorrow, he would indeed become the representative of the senior classes, and asked why Chris was asking, to which he replied that he was simply worried about his comrades. Meanwhile, he himself had formed some kind of plan in his head. The next day, Fall, who was proud of himself, told everyone how all the best universities would start hunting for him in order to get him for themselves, which, of course, his classmates did not like. Having finally lost his dreams, the heir of the White Dog already imagined how the whole world would be at his feet, and he himself would be at the top of the universe. At that moment, the Devil's Son entered the classroom, opening the door almost with his foot and asking with an arrogant grin where that very winner was. This shocked the pompous and self-important Max, brought him down to earth, and even scared him a little. Having come to his senses, he jumped up, banged his fists on the desk, and indignantly asked loudly what kind of loser dared to disturb him. Fully confident, Chris declared that Fall had the right to call him whatever he wanted, while at the same time he continued to accumulate hostile energy emanating from the surrounding students. The protagonist challenges the heir of the White Dog, to which he laughs in his face, saying that his level is much higher and he will win without any problems. The arrogant blonde agrees to the duel, unconditionally believing that he will, of course, win. But Chris was not happy with this answer. He effortlessly and with a satisfied grin pressed the blonde's face to the desk where he was sitting, saying that it was not very polite to answer an opponent's challenge without bowing. The protagonist's gaze darkened. His aura became as gloomy and frightening as possible, and he added that Max was a very good and obedient dog. Chris's homeroom teacher was extremely excited about him entering the ring, as his strength level was more than half that of Fall, but there was nothing she could do about it. Before the fight began, Max made a sarcastic comment that the Devil's son would not be helped by his father. At this point, the winner of the previous fight noticed that his opponent was still wearing a school shirt instead of a combat uniform, and again made a nasty joke about Chris not having enough money for armor. The protagonist noted out loud that the heir of the white dog chattered too much without any reason, and moreover, did not observe the rules of decency. The enraged blonde furiously declared that as soon as Chris hit him, he would not live. He clearly didn't expect that the brunette would shatter his armor into pieces with one blow of his fist. The next cold-blooded blow from the heir of Satan landed in the stomach of the former winner. A few drops of blood spurted from Max's mouth, as he did not expect such a turn of events. All the spectators, including Teacher Adams, were shocked by Halliwell's strength. Chris took another swing, starting to say that in his next life Max should be more humane. He finished the sentence, already delivering furious blows to Fall as if he were a punching bag. Vivian even began to ask him to stop, fearing for the blonde's physical health. She shouted that Chris had won, trying to appeal to his reason and not allow the wild rage that had taken hold of him to kill his opponent. With one cat-like leap, she found herself in the ring and quickly walked up to the main character, calming him down and asking him to stop, explaining that his sister and aunt would appear before a military tribunal because of him for the murder he was trying to commit. Pulling him by the shoulder, the young teacher assured him that she would sort everything out herself. The anger that had taken over the protagonist's mind did not immediately make it clear that he was being called, and only when he accidentally grabbed Vivian's hand did he realize that she was standing next to him. An agitated Adams tried to reach his consciousness and asked him to trust her. Looking irritably at the blonde lying on the floor, the brunette nevertheless agreed to leave the ring. The teacher sincerely thanked him for this decision. Adams immediately gave the order to take the half-dead, comatose Fall to the infirmary and give him help, terrified by the knowledge that the white dogs would probably start an investigation. But she was comforted by the fact that it would not be easy to sort out all this given who Chris Halliwell was. Then a brilliant idea came to her mind, and she invited the brunette to become a representative of the senior classes. A little later, Miss Adams was called into the principal's office and asked what she thought about Chris's actions, to which she proudly stated that his behavior was completely justified, since Fall was the first to break the rules and attack Vanessa Evans. But the deputy director strongly disagreed with Vivian's opinion, firmly saying that this circumstance did not give Chris the right to beat Max. The second deputy disagreed with him and said that it was unfair to establish double standards, according to which the heir of the white dog has the right to beat someone, but he himself is untouchable. The principal added that there might be a public outcry if the school found Halliwell innocent, and Vivian, her wrist bleeding purple from Chris's grip, said she had a special thought about that. She raised her hand, showed the trace left behind, and said that he should become a representative of the senior students, and then immediately explained to the stunned members of the administration that the boy did not leave the trace on purpose and did not harm her in any way. Looking at the injury on her arm, the girl explained her thought by saying that an ordinary first-level warrior couldn't get past her defense, and so she felt that he should study at this school. The blonde's last argument made the members of the school management company think. Lighting a cigarette, one of the deputies told Vivian to make it official so that the white dogs would have nothing to cling to and close the matter. As she was leaving, the girl reminded that the administration should wait for the dogs to visit in any case, because Chris had already beaten Fall to the punch anyway. Her serenity and carelessness at that moment shocked the venerable old men and made them wonder if she was taking advantage of them. A few hours later, Monica Evans with her daughter and Max Fall with his father were sitting on two sofas opposite each other in the director's office. The director stated that they knew the reason for their arrival and suggested getting straight to the point, and remembering the reason, Vanessa burst into laughter into her fist, and her mother had difficulty holding back a smug grin. On the opposite sofa, the atmosphere was completely different. The blonde's father was blacker than a thundercloud, and his son, covered in bandages, was throwing sparks from his eyes. Unable to contain herself, Vanessa laughed out loud at the mere sight of a defeated and beaten Fall. The president of the White Dogs Company, the blonde's father, spoke first. He said that his son was ready to apologize to Monica's daughter and that they would both do whatever she wanted so that she would give them Halliwell. But she, with a good-natured smile, refused everything, declaring that she needed the boy herself and she would not sell him. Then the irritated President Soft switched to threats, assuring the girl that he respected only her exploits and did not consider her worthy of her title. Unable to bear such humiliation towards her mother, Vanessa clenched her fists and rushed at the old man. But her mother stopped her, calmly placing her hand on her shoulder. With a completely unperturbed expression, Monica stated, rather than asked, that she could perceive the old man's words as a direct threat to one of the order representative's family members. The director and his deputies were shocked by Monica's self-confidence and waited with cold sweat on their temples for the reaction of the White Dog's president. He, with sweat on his forehead, began to justify himself by saying that Chris was not a member of the Evans family. The school administration concluded that Monica valued Chris, and she, meanwhile, demonstratively led her daughter to the exit, showing that she was not going to continue this futile conversation. When she was already leaving, the old man shouted after her that Chris was still a demon. Then, an irritated Monica said that she had made a bet with a man that Chris would become a demon and go crazy, and added that if that happened, she would fix everything. Suddenly, Chris sneezed loudly, spraying snot in all directions. Complaining about who was remembering him, Chris mentally resented the fact that he was forced to go somewhere he didn't want to go at all. While the bus was taking him in the right direction, Chris began to suffer from boredom. Noticing a girl through the window of a nearby bus, he deliberately drew her attention to himself, deciding to play. Cunning gleamed in his eyes as he decided to tease his victim. Without hiding his pleasure, Chris voiced all her worst assumptions about him, thereby causing the girl to panic. Panicking, the girl rushed to the driver, asking him to stop the bus. The commotion in the neighboring bus increased the levels of hostility, which only played into the hands of the one-horned man who sat enjoying the harvest. Chris's glee quickly faded as the bus pulled into its destination, and the number of happy people per square meter was astounding. Feeling an unexpected surge of strength, Chris began to look for its source, the energy that was well known to him. He didn't have to search for long. He quickly spotted familiar figures in the crowd. Realizing that the foster mother had found out about what this dog had done and had decided to show her concern, Chris immediately expressed his feelings with a gesture. With a heartfelt expression on his face, the one-horned man happily showed his middle finger. Vanessa impulsively yelled at him about what an asshole he was, thereby sending him energy. Pleased with how she was responding to his provocation, Chris walked past, charged with additional energy. The announcement of the start of the Senior League competition and greetings to invited observers was made. While the host was talking about the strength in the unity of people and werewolves, demanding applause from the audience, Chris was lost in his thoughts, anticipating unexpected guests who could give him even more energy. Announcements continued to pour out of the speakers one after another, starting with the fact that participants would have 5 minutes to introduce themselves. Everyone started chanting their wishes while Chris thought about what he would say when it was his turn. As expected, he didn't bother. So when he came out on stage, the one-horned man called everyone scum and gave a big fuck with both hands. The audience clapped in shock, and Vanessa, covering her face with her hand, repeated under her breath that she didn't know him. The stunned director asked Miss Adams if Halliwell was going too far, to which she agreed with the director. The announced rules stated that the participants in the competition would be sent to the island for a month and would be provided with food only for the first 3 days, and then they would have to find food on their own. Also, dozens of monsters and beasts living on the other side of the Devil's Gate were released onto the island. Energy balls were implanted into their bodies, which must be collected to get points, and the best 100 will fight in the arena. To help the participants, only balloons are given, which show them on air and save their lives in critical situations, but the saved students will be disqualified. With the help of special magic, the students were transported into the plane. Once inside the Iron Bird, the one-horned man suddenly heard someone shout about the appearance of a demon and turned around to see what kind of demon had fallen into the hands of the haters. But after a couple of seconds, he realized that they had all turned their attention to him. And not only had they paid attention, but had pounced on him with the whole crowd. Meanwhile, Vanessa and her mother were watching the live broadcast, and the excited girl asked her mother if she thought Chris would be able to take a worthy position, to which Monica immediately replied that she had no doubt that he would not. The daughter objected that Chris was much stronger than even herself, but her mother explained to her that their region simply would not allow a demon to win. She became sad, realizing that Monica was right, and the other players simply would not allow the son of Satan to win. Seeing on the screen how the brunette was attacked in the very first seconds, the girl's heart, already sitting on pins and needles, sank, and she wholeheartedly wished the unrecognized demon good luck. And the peaceful and good residents furiously attacked the one-horned man, shouting that the demon must be killed. The demon, having lost his temper, began to defend himself. He easily scattered a bunch of fighters for good who were trying to kill him. Having insulted everyone once again, Chris waved his hand at them, putting on his backpack. Having hurried everyone, not forgetting to say a few flattering words about their mental abilities, the guy broke the door and jumped out of the plane. Spectators below watched in horror as the remaining participants fell out of the plane in droves, screaming for help. A notification sounded about the automatic activation of the rescue balloon and the disqualification of the player. The hostility grew, and the one-horned one only quite appreciated the functions of the rescue device. The audience was outraged by the guy's behavior, trying to find out from each other who he was and what school he was from. Despite the fact that the arena was located in a mountainous area, Chris landed safely. Unlike the others who watched the unicorn fly, Vanessa was genuinely glad that it remained unharmed. Suddenly, the violet-eyed girl heard someone say that the demon was finished, as a third-level ghost bull had set its sights on him. While Chris stood there and calmly talked to himself, thinking about where he had ended up, how long it would take to get to the resource warehouse, and which way he should go, an enraged threat was already heading towards him. A worried Vanessa was beside herself with excitement, mentally trying to warn her adopted brother. While deciding where to go, the one-horned man did not notice how two maddened bulls were rushing towards him at full speed from behind. There was a terrible sound of impact. All the birds from the nearby trees flew up into the sky in fear, and the guy just scratched his back in irritation, complaining that there were too many insects in this forest. Turning around, the half-demon saw two bulls that had tried to attack him, lying on the ground with broken horns, completely unconscious. Having cheerfully asked whether they had decided to come to him themselves, Chris concluded that he was starting to like this game. The members of the jury, who were in the assembly hall, gaped in surprise, not understanding where such strength came from. Among those present, awkward questions began to be asked, and the answer suggested itself. This guy needed to be checked better before being sent there, since he was raised by the hero of the knightly order, Monica. The teachers, talking among themselves, tried to find out in which course they teach how to deal with such monsters, but there are no such courses, which meant that this bastard learned everything himself. Before they could recover from the realization of the guy's uniqueness, they were thrown into an even more powerful shock when they saw how he happily ate the energy balls of these monsters, which were a key item for completing the mission. The only consolation they found for themselves was that he ate these balls better than the meat of these bulls. Completely forgetting about the rules, Chris happily enjoyed the unexpected treat, deciding that he didn't need meat since he didn't know how to cook, and having raised his fighting spirit, aimed at earning points. Having stolen the cubs from the mother bear, the one-horned bear happily ran through the forest, feeding on the energy of the mother, who was trying to catch up with him and take her babies, and then with no less pleasure, teased other animals and fed on their energy. The spectators watching him were perplexed by what was happening. The guy, walking through the clearing, wrapped in his latest trophy in the form of a huge crocodile snake, saw dog ears sticking out in the tall grass. Delighted with the puppy, Chris rushed to the find and grabbed it by the ears. Pulling the fluffy thing up, the guy discovered that it was a girl dog. Suddenly, out of nowhere, 3 more of the same appeared, who were her sisters. The youngest desperately called them for help. The elders rushed into battle without hesitation. Chris, disconcerted, tried to explain that what had happened was not at all what they thought. The sisters said they understood that there had been a misunderstanding, but the well-beaten one-horned man sarcastically asked why he had gotten it so badly if he was not guilty of anything, not forgetting to remind them that he was also a human being. But they had really acted like dogs. Having thrown off his burden, which had taken the entire dog's blow on its carcass and was riddled with knives sticking out of it, the guy asked the girls which of them knew how to cook. The older ones were slightly embarrassed by such a question, but the younger one's eyes lit up with enthusiasm and the desire to demonstrate her culinary skills. The girls were actively engaged in cooking, and the guy, watching them, thought that he was now watching a cooking show. After such efforts, Chris expected to see at least food made of pure gold in the pot, But what appeared before his eyes horrified him, and the demon was perplexed as to how such correct and meticulous preparation could give such a result. And even the crocodile snake was angrier than from the fact that he was killed. Standing dumbfoundedly next to the pot with the unidentified delicacy, Chris steadfastly repelled all the girls' persuasions and attempts to make him taste their gastronomic creation, trying to shift this right on to them. The argument was rudely interrupted by swords flying at the guy. Another girl appeared on the horizon. She jumped and swung her sword in a punitive gesture at the moment when the other sisters were surprised by her appearance. However, they were not the only ones surprised. The underdemon was no less shocked, recognizing in this girl the victim of his morning buffoonery. Reacting quickly, the one-horned one grabbed the younger sister by the head and held it in front of him, using it as a living shield. Before she could fully correct the flight of her sword, the older sister cut off several strands of hair from the younger sister's bangs and ponytail. The morning acquaintance was overcome with anger, which only played into the protagonist's hands. The youngest cried and begged the demon to let her go, which he did, casually throwing her away from him. The sisters excitedly surrounded the sufferer, inquiring about her well-being. The one-horned man was amused. He even started making jokes about what breed of dog the girls were, suggesting that with ears like theirs, they couldn't be dachshunds. Hearing such a statement, the elder one became seriously enraged and decided to once again enter into battle with the underdemon, promising to tear off his horns. Chris tried to laugh off her threat by saying that her family was trying to poison him. However, the girls did not appreciate his humor and prepared to attack. The guy was clearly not happy with this turn of events, so he started asking what kind of gangster showdown this was, and reminding them that he was the main character here. Turning to the tree to which the girls had pinned him, he tore it out by the roots and scattered everyone with its huge trunk. Realizing that her sisters were not coping, the eldest decided to take matters into her own hands. Waving her sword, she rushed at the demon she hated. He, in turn, not forgetting to sarcastically compare her weapon of attack to a pencil sharpener, turned the situation in his favor and used the sharpened barrel like a sharp stake to attack the violent girl. She deftly parried his attack, accurately thrusting the sword into the very center of the tip. And Chris went into a frenzy, shouting threats at her. And being stronger than her, he threw the tree trunk along with the girl far forward. The older sister of the dog family was familiar with combat techniques and immediately used one of them. The main character was not prepared for this. Falling to the ground, he was indignant that he had not been warned about this. The enraged demon threw the persistent girl back with a powerful wave of fire. Vanessa, watching their fight through the screen, was amazed that such a young girl on the other side already had the third level of power. Vanessa's mother noted that the growing dog has a great future ahead of her. But Vanessa had already returned to the state of worrying about Chris because lumps of dirt were flying around him at the speed of a bullet. Amazed that Halliwell remained standing, the older dog assumed it was because he was the child of the devil. In order to prevent her from making a finishing blow, the heir of Satan rushed straight at the girl, deciding to attack in close combat. Understanding his actions, the dog tried not to let him get close to her. To do this, she created a fiery funnel around herself. Gathering all her strength, she directed it at the hated demon. He began to make his way through the wall of fire energy, no matter how hard the girl tried to hold him back. Having broken the tree trunk with one kick, the protagonist threw it into the epicenter of the funnel created by the girl. The burning wood produced acrid black smoke, which was supposed to distract the dog, and the main character decided to take advantage of this. But he miscalculated, because the dog was completely immune to this kind of trick. But something didn't go according to her plan. Sneaking up from behind, the one-horned man grabbed the dog's shoulder with a death grip, telling her that she had lost. All viewers of the broadcast were extremely unhappy with Halliwell's unfair victory. Everyone, except Vanessa and Monica, the first one was not just not unhappy, she was even jubilant. Monica wondered why Chris hadn't shown such success before. Chris gave the older dog some crocodile head soup as a trophy. She was not thrilled with this food and suggested finding something more edible. But the imperturbable son of Satan spilled a plate of green concoction on the girl's face. Not expecting such actions from Chris and such a taste of food, the girl fell backwards, and something like foam flowed from her mouth. The dog sisters were horrified. On the third day, the staff of participants were stunned at breakfast by the sudden appearance of a girl dog who stole their portion of shashlik. Staff began to calm the baby down, assuring her that there was enough food for everyone and that she didn't need to hide in the tree at all. Suddenly, the main character knocked out one of the service personnel and thus provided food for his comrades. Hungry Chris and the older dog pounced on the mountains of provisions and began to eat them. The participants of the competition were pleased with their catch, but suddenly they discovered with horror that they had attacked employees. Then the heroes had to urgently grab all the food and run away from the crime scene. Suddenly, when it seemed that they would be caught in a matter of seconds, Chris assured everyone that there was no need to panic, and in fact, they would be able to get even more food than they had now. 4 other program participants were already rushing towards the resource point. Arriving at the place, they saw the son of Satan dressed as an employee, but they could not recognize him, and creating the illusion of serving the guys, the one-horned man asked them what rank of supplies they were interested in. They were incredibly surprised by this clarification. Then the disguised protagonist showed the guys the entire range of food. Even more stunned, they all unanimously chose the most filling set of those offered. The devil's son chuckled and told them to prepare 4 energy balls for payment. The guys, completely stunned, said that no one had warned them about the payment, to which the main character put on a surprised face and confidently declared that a high-ranking dinner must be paid for. As an alternative, he offered to give away a free, low-level dinner consisting of just a few protein bars and bottles of water. A guy from the team expressed outrage at the high pay, explaining that 4 energy balls was all they had earned in a few days. The sisters, standing at a distance, wondered whether everything would work out as planned, and whether the team that had come would agree to such an exchange. But in the end, they came to the conclusion that they would have to trust the demon. While remaining unperturbed on the outside, Chris was already jubilant on the inside, tasting victory. To increase the psychological pressure and force the guys to quickly say goodbye to their balls, the one-horned man began to bluff. Pretending to have accidentally blurted out secret information, the demon finally pulled out his catch, deftly hooking it. The leader of the incoming team began to offer to pay for something that was supposedly not intended for otherworldly ears. Playing the good guy, Chris told another lie, making the guys promise not to tell anyone. The deception was successful. The sisters rejoiced. Strengthening his position and wanting to get the balls as quickly as possible, the half-demon subtly hinted that he liked these guys, so he would not tell anyone else about the information about doubling the reward at the end of the game for buying high-ranking food. And the leader, following the gaze of his opponent in a cap with the designation of service personnel, saw another team rapidly approaching them. So without thinking, he gave up all 4 of his energy balls for a high-ranking set. Watching from the side, the dog sisters admitted that this demon was quite smart. Meanwhile, the observers were raging, trying to find the culprit in everything that was happening. They were perplexed as to how this half-demon managed to pull off all this and where the dogs came from with him. They shouted that this was a deception and a violation of the rules, and demanded that the main character return the balls to their owners. However, the boys' school principal cleverly avoided the accusations, asking in surprise since when was sharing resources a violation of the rules, and other school representatives immediately supported him, noting that such ingenuity and resourcefulness could only be praised. Not expecting this, representatives of other schools began to complain about what their students should do, to which the main character's teacher interrupted all debates, reminding that if the rules had been broken, the organizers would have immediately reported it. Chris continued to happily reap the fruits of his cunning plan, collecting handfuls of the balls given to him. Suddenly, a voice came from the helicopter, shouting that everyone had been deceived and that the guy was not a representative of the competition staff. The biggest and fattest employee fell out of his confinement, somehow managing to free his mouth, and began to shout that they were tied up and that energy resources were being extracted from the other participants using false information. The level of hostility among those present began to rise rapidly. A commotion began in the crowd, with people trying to figure out who was who. Taking advantage of the moment, Chris and his newly formed team of dogs took off running. Continuing to run away, the one-horned one deservedly praised himself. Pleased with the result, not only did he collect a whole bunch of balls, but he also filled himself with hostile energy so that it became 31237. Following closely behind the boy, one of the sisters asked how many balls he had collected, but the demon, not wanting to reveal his cards, avoided answering, saying that it did not matter. The questioner was satisfied with his answer, since she said that any number would be fine with them. And this made Chris very wary, since he did not understand what business they had with his balls. He wanted to say something, but he was stopped by the spears flying towards them. The older sister deftly parried the attack with her foot, indignant at who it could be. The weapon, returned to its owner, was seized by a tenacious hand with long, sharp red nails. The thrower's owner praised the dog's excellent reaction, but she immediately added that she regretted that the owner of such outstanding abilities would now die. The hostility between those present gradually grew. Chris greeted the unexpected guests with his characteristic arrogant smile. The older dog immediately began to instruct the hero regarding the abilities of the trio threatening them, betting that, most likely, the most dangerous was the girl in the hood, since the spear thrower belonged to the snake family and showed herself well in hand-to-hand combat, and taller than her and twice as large. The rhinoceros girl belonged to the Order of Conquerors, possessing remarkable strength, but the third companion was hiding, so it was difficult to characterize her. The snake, turning to the girl in the hood, offered to give her the longest and, accordingly, the strongest of the opponents, but she refused, justifying it by saying that the larger the opponent, the faster his death occurs. And she does not like that, and ordered the snake to take the guy herself, deciding that she and the rhinoceros would deal with the dogs. Hearing this, the eldest told the other sisters not to interfere and covered them with herself when they promised her what she asked for. The snake told the guy that she liked him the most and suggested playing with him, holding the spear between her breasts and licking it erotically. Chris instantly fell under her spell, losing his head and blushing with excitement. He began babbling something about how he was from a decent family and would be misunderstood. The sisters, hoping that he would lead them to victory, almost had their eyes pop out of their sockets from such a reaction from the hero. Playfully running her fingertips over her lips, the snake languidly continued, answering the dog's silent question that he would now be her toy. With words that did not bode well, the snake attacked. Seeing this, the frightened older woman shouted at the boy to be careful. One Horned intercepted the spear with lightning speed, saying that he was not as cruel as she was and was giving people a chance to prove themselves. And then he asked if she wanted to set a small goal to start with, like until the first tears. Rhino and Hood were shocked at how easily the underdemon repelled the attack, and the dogs enthusiastically kept their fists up for him. Without waiting for an answer to his question, Chris pulled the spear so that the snake was face to face with him. Being in such extreme closeness, he repeated his question, adding to it a caustic reminder of the girl's age, calling her auntie by syllables. Her reaction was not long in coming, raising her hostility level to 666. She, with tears in her eyes, wishing death on the guy, threw him away with a powerful blow of her tail. While the elder one was anxiously looking to see if the demon was okay, her opponent, the rhinoceros, crept up behind her, clasped his hands, and hit the dog on the head with all his might, that all the birds in the area fell from their branches. Having broken the tree, the one-horned man complained that the snake was very merciless to him. Getting to his feet, Chris said he had no idea what to do next, to which the enraged snake, in a new attack, shouted at him not to think about salvation, but about his last words before death. At this point, the one-horned man decides to improve his body with the help of the system, enables dynamic vision, increases strength, and swings. From his blow, the snake flies far upside down. Noticing the blood on the grass and then his injured hand, the demon is surprised that he missed, because there was no way he could have done that. Trying to find an explanation for what happened, the one-horned one complains that the naturally flexible body of the descendants of the snake tribe deprived him of most of his strength, since her slippery scales changed the direction of his blow and he was injured by her spear. While he was thinking, the enemy came to his senses and stood smiling, appreciating the guy's blow, calmly saying that she was born to kill people like him. The snake aimed at the demon's legs in anticipation. At that moment, the one-horned man realized that he really lacked combat experience. So Chris ran away as fast as he could, but only to the nearest huge tree. Asking why the snake, she decided that he was planning to escape from her. Saying that he was just warming up, the hero pulled the tree out by its roots, and then he threw it at his rival, who easily dodged it, laughing at the fact that the demon forgot that she was a snake, and therefore very nimble. In the blink of an eye, she thrust the spear right between the hero's legs, triumphantly recalling how he called her auntie. However, the tip of the spear broke and flew off to the side. She didn't expect this turn of events, so she cursed loudly. Taking advantage of the situation, Chris grabbed the snake by the throat and lifted it off the ground. Rejoicing at his capture, the one-horned man told the girl that throwing the tree was part of the plan, a kind of trap. Surprised that he was able to trick her, the snake also did not understand how he was able to repel her attack in the most vulnerable place of all men. Her question made the guy burst into devilish laughter, saying that he probably hadn't heard anything about steel balls. Incinerating the one caught in his gaze, the demon suggested that they think together about what he should do with her. All 5 sisters fought fiercely with the 2 snake companions, the eldest with the rhinoceros, and all the others with the hood. The hooded girl stood and yawned, openly bored, complaining that her opponents were too weak to interest her. Suddenly she noticed a snake lying on the ground. Immediately running up to her and putting her left hand under her head, the silver-haired girl excitedly asked the snake what had happened to her. But instead of answering, the girl, with blood flowing from her mouth, only said that she could no longer continue. This answer did not satisfy the hood, so she angrily shouted her question loudly again to find out what this demon did to her. The same question was spinning in the heads of the dogs. Walking triumphantly, Chris said that he did nothing of the sort. He simply tried out his new technique on her, thinking that with her aggression, the cold-blooded one herself gave him more strength. Under the contemptuous gaze of the hood and the frightened snake, the half-demon, either sincerely or with the aim of mocking, enthusiastically told about how a new world had opened up to him. Turning blacker than a thundercloud, the silver-haired girl said that she was wrong about him, and since he was able to defeat such a strong opponent, then he was worthy of fighting her. Grabbing the swords that were behind her back, she ordered the sub-demon to come forward to begin the fight. Quietly wishing himself luck, the hero prepared for a tough fight. Flying towards her opponent like a tornado funnel, she put knives to his throat and introduced herself. Chris, instantly grabbing the handles, complimented his new friend Lucy that she looked great in a killer costume. The sisters shouted at him not to fight the killer alone, but the one-horned one did not listen to them. Lucy lost her temper and informed him about it. Seeing her eyes blazing with rage, the demon laughed, deciding to add fuel to the fire and quipped, as if she had been calm before. The dogs were beside themselves with excitement, realizing that his rival had been raised as a killing machine since childhood. Their fears were not unfounded, and the demon was quickly wounded in the leg. The hood continued attack after attack, moving with lightning speed. A new injury was not long in coming, and a large gaping wound appeared on the hero's right side. Without having time to follow Lucy's movements, Chris realized that her skills were much more powerful than the snake's when she put a dagger to his throat from behind, declaring that since this was his maximum, he was finished. Realizing that the enemy's speed greatly exceeded his, the one-horned one failed to repel her attacks time after time, receiving more and more wounds. Watching the guy fail to deal with the killer, the dogs and Vivian Adams, on opposite sides of the monitor, experienced the same feelings of anxiety for his life. But not everyone shared their feelings, if not to say that almost no one, because representatives of other schools rejoiced and were delighted with each new wound of the annoying demon, encouraging Lucy and wishing her a speedy victory, and him death. Vanessa felt something between fear for his life and irritation that he dared to lose to someone other than her. But Monica calmed her down by gently placing her hand on her daughter's head and telling her to look at the expression on her adopted son's face. Having done as her mother said, the violet-eyed girl tensely fixed her gaze on the screen, trying to notice the slightest changes in her stepbrother's facial expressions in order to understand whether the woman was right about the fact that he had long since matured a further plan of action. Meanwhile, as he continued to be attacked by Lucy countless times, Chris thought that not only was he inferior to her in speed, but he also had no experience in killing, so he would simply die of exhaustion trying to fight off her attacks. So he saw only one way out of this situation. Gaping with numerous wounds from which blood was pouring out almost like a fountain, the one-horned man rose to his feet and loudly shouted in his favorite insulting form that the girl was already an old woman and also untalented, since she practically did not touch him. Therefore, she had no right to be called a warrior. The only thought pulsating in his head was that he needed to force her to kill him quickly. The crowd watching the fight gaped in surprise at what this half-demon was doing. The guy continued to stand and shout caustic phrases at the girl in the hood, suggesting that she not hide, but continue the battle, or at least give him a massage, promising to give her 5 stars for this and come next time. With each new blow the warrior dealt him, Chris continued to say that this was weak for someone who had such a high title of killer. Vanessa, watching her brother's actions in horror, grabbed her mother's hand, asking if they should order a coffin, since her step-relative was quite large, and it would not be possible to buy such a coffin without prior ordering. The mother looked at her son without taking her eyes off him, trying to understand what he was planning. Sweat appeared on her face from the tension. The hostility emanating from the killer increased very slowly. Chris was starting to get angry that this stubborn girl practically didn't react to all his provocations, which could really lead to his death. But he diligently convinced himself that the main problem of all such killers is the lack of restraint. Therefore, the one-horned one decided to stand his ground and still make her lose control and turn defeat into victory. At that moment, he suddenly noticed that he had a chance. Lucy slowed down slightly, and the demon immediately took advantage of this. Deciding to use the last of his savings, he took advantage of the body improvement. Having outpaced his rival in speed, the hero delivered a powerful punch to her face. The force of the blow threw the hooded girl back, but Chris managed to grab her leg, thereby forcing her to begin to restrain herself even more so as not to succumb to his provocations. Having thrown Lucy with all his might to the ground, he still failed to throw her off balance, since she only thought about how to restrain herself, not to show him her weakness and to regain her vigilance, which she had lost while concentrating on the desire to kill him. Lying on the ground for the first time in such a state, the killer felt annoyance overcome her. The next second, something happened that she didn't expect at all. The subdemon flew at her with a fatal blow using the elbow destroyer technique. Lucy prepared herself for the worst, but a tree trunk appeared out of nowhere and pushed the attacker back to a safe distance. The rhinoceros stood up to defend the killer, screaming angrily about how he dared to hurt her sister, and that now she would count how many lives he had left in reserve. The killer asked him not to do this, but the big sister could not be stopped. She attacked the hero and began to punch him in the face. Rhinoceros couldn't believe her eyes, but all the blows seemed to pass him by. Shouting that warriors never give up, she gathered all her anger and attacked the demon again. Once again, in a short time, the dogs were again afraid for the hero's life. Continuing to furiously beat the guy, overcome by a feeling of revenge, the rhinoceros did not notice how she was giving in to anger more and more, especially because her powerful blows were not perceived by him in any way, but her constantly increasing hostility only played into the opponent's hands. Feeding on her energy, Chris began to egg her on even more, saying that his older sister should have listened to her younger sister and not bothered him. Falling for all his provocations like a child, the rhinoceros, shouting that she shouldn't be underestimated, once again rushed into battle, but immediately fell into the steel trap of his hand. The attacker's eyes widened as she realized that she couldn't pull her fist out of the hand of this vile half-demon who had hurt her two sisters. One confident, powerful movement, and the rhinoceros' entire armor shattered into tiny pieces, as if it were made not of hard steel, but of the thinnest, most fragile glass. Tears welled up in the eyes of the defeated girl. She covered her nakedness with her hands, cursing him with all her might, while continuing to feed him with the choicest hostility. But the guy even forgot about it, being so impressed by the size of the rhino's chest that he couldn't even hold back, commenting on how big it was. The spear that flew at him from behind brought him back to reality. The three sisters, who had so confidently threatened them at the beginning, left the battlefield with their tails between their legs. Lucy, passing by, cast an angry glance over her shoulder at the half-demon and said that she remembered him. But he ignored her words, regretting out loud that he had to let three rivals go. The dogs, jubilant, surrounded the guy, vying with each other to repeat that, "It turns out, this little devil is actually cool." Looking at his wounds, Chris thought that although his body felt pain, everything was healing quickly. Inspired, the one-horned one commanded that they needed to go and raise their place in the rankings, and thought that physical training was good, but they needed to find even more energy. The dogs happily ran after the demon. In the center of the zone, the group fought with strange monsters that looked like toothy worms, which literally crawled out of every hole in the ground, of which there were countless. The second level with the big-mouthed worms looked more like some kind of purgatory. Seeing all this, the sisters, who did not want to go there, said that they hoped that they did not need to go there. Chris asked where they were rushing to and, making a witty joke, explained that they were going to wait for the main boss. The wait was not long, as the demon said. The protector of worms came out of the hole. The elder sister immediately recognized the fifth-level monster, the Beetle Queen, and she told her companion that they would not be able to defeat her. To which the one-horned one only slyly asked why she thought that they themselves would fight the queen. Standing up from his hiding place, Chris shouted at the top of his lungs that the participants should quickly deal with this monster, as a lot of energy would fall out of it. And if they didn't take advantage of the opportunity, there wouldn't be another one like it. Taking what they heard at face value, each participant was eager to kill her first. Everyone began to bombard her with their attacks, trying to get ahead of the others. Their attacks were accompanied by heated arguments about whether the opponent was strong enough to deal with the queen. Where each fancied himself stronger than the other, the incessant debates drove the queen crazy, and she told them all to shut up. Even though she got angry, she still didn't react to it. Her force field handled it quite well. Realizing that the queen was a very strong opponent, many began to meticulously try to somehow catch her. Chris, looking at what was happening, was perplexed as to why such a strong boss as she was not reacting to the crowds attacking her like swarms of annoying flies. Watching the monster, the underdemon was surprised at how she could be so strong and yet have no weak points. Suddenly, his gaze touched the queen's back, and he couldn't believe his eyes, thinking that he might have found her weakness. Deciding to test his hypothesis, he whispered the plan into his partner's ear. The older dog didn't appreciate the plan of action, protesting because the little devil would be putting himself in mortal danger. But he said that the game was worth the candle, and no refusals would be accepted. Resolutely moving towards the queen with his spear, the one-horned one began to loudly insult her. Screaming, wishing for the monster to die, the demon threw the spear at her back with all his might. When the spear hit its target, Chris shouted at the older dog to do what they had agreed on. The queen's hostility grew rapidly as Susie used the earth strike, just like she did in the fight when she first confronted the demon. When the monster found himself pierced by a spear and under the blow of a dog, the devil's gaze was met with what he had guessed at first. Swinging hard and concentrating all his strength into his fist, Chris struck the queen in that spot, piercing her through and snatching the crystal. Seeing that the devil was right, the older dog happily praised him for his intelligence. But her joy was not destined to last long. Hearing terrible sounds behind her, Susie turned around to look at them with apprehension. A terrible monster, as if it had crawled out of the underworld itself, opened its huge mouth, similar to the mouth of a devilish volcano that swallows up all living things like a black hole, and aimed at the main character. Having shouted a warning to the one-horned one that the queen was alive and that he needed to run, the little dog herself took off running. The moment Chris felt the most powerful stream of hostility, his head ended up in the mouth of a terrible monster. Susie stopped, watching as the guy's body disappeared into the queen's mouth, inch by inch, but she had no idea how to help him. The monster's rapid absorption of the unicorn was unstoppable. Suddenly, there was an unpleasant sound of tearing flesh and a demon's hand appeared from outside, accompanying his appearance with choice curses. Chris, with his pants torn down to his shorts and his bare torso, climbed out of the queen's carcass and straightened up to his full height. Shouting at the boy not to be a fool and to control the amount of energy he expended, the eldest of the sisters rushed towards him. I reached the guy just as he was falling down lifelessly, landing face down on the girl's ample chest like a pillow. Susie didn't expect this and was genuinely scared for the guy when it seemed like everything was already over. The deputy headmaster of Holywell's school demanded that a medical team be sent to the arena immediately to provide emergency assistance. Chris's foster family watched tensely through the monitor. The system notified about the successful absorption of the demon's soul, obtaining its power, armor, and self-healing skill. Bandaged from head to toe, the one-horned man woke up in a hospital bed. Hearing the fuss, a good-natured nurse in a white coat and a cap with a red plus immediately approached the bed. Being from the cow family, the pretty blonde had impressive breasts, and, having inquired about his well-being, she went to call the doctor. However, the nurse's luscious figure did not concern Chris as much as her newly acquired skills. The guy was so happy and proud of himself, because before that he thought that he was good for nothing, but it turned out that he still had the power of a demon. Wondering why he hadn't woken up earlier, he suggested that maybe he needed to piss someone off again to heal. Without thinking twice, he decided to move from theory to practice. Concentrating, he began to listen to his sensations, which flowed as powerful energy into his fist. The bandages tore apart and flew in shreds in all directions, power seething within him. The middle finger, freed from the bandage, was covered with scaly armor. At this point, the transformation ended and the power dried up, and the one-horned man looked at his finger, which he loved to show everyone in dismay, trying to get angry and fill himself with energy. Chris began to shout angrily, releasing all his anger at the unfinished ability, describing in vivid detail into the void what he thought about all of this. Remembering about pumping, The demon had an idea that cost him 1,000 units, but restored his spirit. Filled with strength again, his palm became covered in scales. While waiting for the transformation to continue, the demon stared unblinkingly at the rest of the hand, which had not changed in any way yet. When his entire arm up to the shoulder was covered with armor, the one-horned one rejoiced, celebrating the victory in his soul. Then he decided to try out his new attack power. At that moment, the nurse returned with the doctor. To his pleasant surprise, the doctor noted that most of the boy's internal injuries were healing, and he was returning to normal, and he promised the one-horned man to discharge him in a month. But the indignant son of the devil resolutely declared that he must participate in tomorrow's competition. However, the doctor calmly replied that Chris would not be able to take part in any competition because his bones were shattered, and he himself needed rehabilitation. The nurse changed the boy's bandages while he was busily thinking about how to get out of the hospital as quickly as possible. Mentally apologizing to the innocent hospital employee, Chris decided to check if the old energy-generating mechanism was still working. He extended his right hand and decisively grabbed the unsuspecting girl by the butt. The embarrassed and angry girl screamed indignantly. The hostility increased, but only by 100 units, and the one-horned one pretended that nothing had happened and that he was simply warming up his hand. The angry girl left the room saying that she would call a nurse to help the guy, and he complained that he would have received much more energy from his aunt. Running out into the corridor, the one-horned man at the speed of light felt up all the young nurses he met on his way. Each of them gave him a new surge of hostile energy. While collecting the crop, Chris summed up how much and what color underwear the girls were wearing, that 8 of them were wearing suspenders, and 1 had a size 3 breast. All the male patients watching the scene gave the thumbs up in approval, and they all started to get nosebleeds. But the main character didn't even think about stopping there, and using his super speed, he undressed all these guys and began to collect energy by waving their panties. After a few days, the spectator areas around the sparring arena began to fill up with people. The Evans family, who came to watch the fight, complained that the demon had defeated the queen, but would not be able to participate in further competitions. Suddenly, a voice from the speakers asked Chris Holywell from school, number 3, and Lewis Carroll from school, number 2, to come up to the arena, and this message shocked Vanessa. She frantically began to ask her mother if she had misheard her brother's name, since he was seriously injured and should not have been here. In hospital pajamas, right over the bandages, a one-horned man walked out onto the arena with a leisurely gait. The worried sister, seeing that it was really her brother coming, began to shout at him not to do this. Until the referee gave the signal, Keys and Lewis stood on either side of him, and the demon looked as happy as possible and hummed songs to himself. But for the opponent, it looked frightening. It seemed to him that the opponent was a complete psychopath and was doing this on purpose to intimidate him. As they approached the white line, Carroll grabbed his scabbard, preparing to draw his sword, and Holywell continued to hum, which discouraged the first, who was at a loss as to what his opponent was going to do. Unexpectedly, the one-horned man bowed sharply, extended his hand, and said kindly that he was glad to meet him, which further discouraged his rival. Releasing the scabbard, Lewis mentally scolded himself for being rude, since he should not have forgotten the basic rules of etiquette, and bowed in return, also saying that he was glad to meet him. Sneering to himself that Carroll was showing such respect to the enemy, Holywell decided to take advantage of the situation. Swinging his arm, the one-horned one hit his opponent's head with all his might. The blow was so powerful that Louis's head went deep into the ground. The judge announced Chris's victory, and he just snapped his fingers, happy with his easy victory. Sitting in the audience, mother and daughter Evans covered their faces with their hands, insisting that they didn't know this guy. Over the next few days of matches, the demon's shameless adaptability helped him defeat one opponent after another with his cunning alone, in literally a matter of seconds. His triumph continued until the referee introduced him to his old friend, a killer named Lucy, who had suddenly appeared in the ring. The fragile-looking girl in the hood came with the firm intention of taking revenge on the son of the devil for the way he treated her sisters and her. Throwing off her cape, the assassin showed her enemy new armor that protected almost her entire body. The demon shuddered for a moment from the unpleasant surprise, then began to clown around in his own characteristic manner. Confused by what was happening, Lucy asked the guy where his weapon was. Chris answered honestly that his body is his weapon. The killer couldn't stand his ridicule, calling him a chatterbox, but he didn't calm down, starting to whine that he was from a poor family, that they had no money, so he couldn't afford to buy a gun. Sheathing her swords, Lucy said that she would not be able to fight an unarmed man in that case. Since she had no more clothes under her armor, she decided not to fight him, but to accept defeat. The guy immediately began to persuade her to take off her armor and not give up without a fight, saying that no one would look at her, and he himself could undress out of a sense of solidarity. This infuriated the killer, and she launched her first attack at him. Catching the green beam with his armored left hand, the boy was surprised by the new power. Then a barrage of powerful attacks rained down on the one-horned one, which were difficult for him to block due to his speed. The guy defended himself with difficulty and thought that if he had met her in the arena earlier, he would have definitely died. Lucy didn't expect this either, because she thought that she would put on armor and easily defeat the demon. Deciding that she could not disgrace the family's honor, she activated all her powers to once again attack the devil's son. The new explosive attacks were even more difficult for the hero to repel. Unable to stop her, the guy thought that if she used such an attack again, he would be left without arms at all. So he decided to try some trick on her again, even though she was ready for them last time. But maybe this time it would work. However, the killer, seeing that the guy was holding on with all his might, launched another attack and pierced his stomach with 2 daggers at the same time. Blood immediately spurted from the mouth of the devil's son. The killer smiled triumphantly, savoring her victory. But Chris had a different opinion, saying that victory would be his. He gathered all his strength and dealt the girl a powerful blow right to the solar plexus. The armor flew apart and Lucy fell to the ground, defeated. Taking the daggers out of his stomach, the hero praised himself for defeating a 3rd-level warrior. Using self-healing, he healed his wounds. Hearing the clash of swords, the boy turned around and saw that Susie, wounded, had fallen to the ground behind him. Picking her up in his arms, Chris, in order to cheer the girl up, joked about whether she had decided to change her breed, while thinking that such a strong girl like her could hardly give in to anyone. So it was strange that there were 32 fractures all over her body. Suddenly, another 3rd-rank warrior named Jason Vance appeared in the ring, and the main character, holding the half-dead Susie in his arms, had to jump back to avoid being attacked by the new player. Deeply indignant and furious, the devil's son caustically asked him if he even knew the rules of the game, not forgetting to call the newcomer an idiot. The dark-skinned blonde man with bright red irises and black-filled eye sockets smiled sweetly and said that he was just saying hello. As he left, Vance added that the attack on Susie was just part of the welcoming ceremony and promised Chris that they would sort out all their issues the next time they met. Then, completely stunned, Holywell realized that Susie had suffered in vain, since Jason's target was himself. As the medics carried Susie away on a stretcher, the one-horned man thanked the silly girl for what she had done for him, assuring her that he really appreciated it. But the girl did not appreciate his words, saying that she was not dying yet. And then came the decisive day when the winner of this year's competition was to be determined. Jason was already standing in the arena waiting for Chris, who was still nowhere to be seen. Vanessa was the first to notice her brother, happily pointing her finger in his direction. The one-horned man walked and waved his hands at everyone, as if he was everyone's favorite. But everyone was surprised by what he was wearing. Jason immediately asked if Chris was thinking of giving up without a fight, to which the guy mysteriously replied that his plans were his own business. The start of the fight was announced, and the opponent immediately decided to test what this representative of the horned family was capable of. The devil's son didn't like the way his opponent called him, so he mockingly asked him if he had seen himself in the mirror. The enemy swung and struck the first blow, which was easily repelled by Chris's new armor. But this did not stop him, and he, admitting that it was difficult to obtain such armor, said that he would still defeat the demon. With a triumphant cry that Holywell had lost, Vance continued to attack him with his sword until he missed a blow. Delighted by the hit, Jason prematurely concluded that Chris had lost. But the one-horned one hastened to bring him back from heaven to earth, ordering him to look up. Raising his head, the opponent saw how what had aroused interest at the beginning of the demon's appearance in the arena, having opened up, flew towards him. The spices pouring out of the jars straight into the enemy's eyes gave the devil's son an opportunity to strike. Furious, Vance said he had initially wanted to let Holywell go, but he had asked for his own death. Suddenly everything was covered in thick black fog. Susie indignantly told Vanessa that it was a trap by which the enemy deprived her of the ability to control the space around him. And that was how he defeated her that time, transforming into a giant monster, a 3rd-tier warrior of the Demon King clan. He said that the hero would now do whatever he said. But Chris decided otherwise and gave him a good punch in the jaw. Rubbing his wrist after the blow, the one-horned one irritably asked who his opponent had transformed into, because he didn't recognize whether it was a horse or someone else. The monster roared that he would kill him at any cost. Looking at everything that was happening, the teacher asked where the student with such unique abilities came from. The foster mother answered her that no matter her son's abilities, the enemy was superior to him in strength. Attacking Chris from behind, the warrior laughed at the fact that the horned one thought that he was the only one so special. The one-horned man asked if his rival was of royal blood. The monster confirmed, saying that he was the executioner of the royal clan. When the devil's son repelled the attack with his armored left hand, the attacker began to ask who he was, since demons do not have such defensive skills. When the attacker asked, Chris replied that he was his dad and punched him right through the stomach. When the monster began to cough up blood, the one-horned pouted and muttered that he was a mediocre executioner and didn't care if he was Voldemort himself. While the one-horned one turned away, thinking that he had won, the monster stood up and, in the utmost desire to kill his opponent, swung his sword. Susie and Vanessa were alarmed by the sudden sound cut off. When the darkness cleared, the spectators saw a monster with a severed horn, kneeling, and his own sword pressed to his throat by the son of the devil. Everyone was shocked because they didn't expect Holywell to win. At that moment, when everything was in a fog, the monster, screaming wishes for death, attacked Chris from behind. But the guy not only deftly stopped her, but also managed to give the monster a good kick in the balls, causing sparks to fly from the latter's eyes. Falling to his knees, the monster asked how the one-horned one knew where he was, to which the answer was a question about why the spices were brought into the ring then. A powerful blow from Jason's sword, and the monster's horn was already lying in his palms, allowing him to mourn the former pride of his family. Roaring, the reincarnated one gifted 2,000 units of energy to his opponent. At this moment, the leader of the Sheep Knights, Amelia, who was a level 8 warrior, appeared in the arena. Taking the dagger from the hollow between her breasts, she rushed to attack. Chris was ready to attack with his sword. Suddenly, the light went out, and the hero flew to the side in a tornado-like whirlpool. A gigantic demon appeared in the arena. After catching and throwing the unicorn aside, Amelia angrily asked the two monsters why they had not listened to her command to retreat. The huge monster grabbed Jason, and he began to apologize to his father for the fact that it turned out so badly, and he could not defeat this half-demon. The enemy screamed angrily, hanging in his father's arms, that if Holywell angered him, he would definitely die. Chris was literally speechless when the Elder Vance told him that the demon must obey him, and then he would be granted the right to surrender voluntarily. Not only the guy was stunned by such a statement, but those sitting in the Evans Hall also reacted to it in the same way. Jason, who had regained his appearance, was angry because his father approved of even some idiot, but not him. Amelia turned to the one-horned man and asked him how he felt about the fact that they were now trying to lure him away, to which he answered that he did not agree. After asking if the Elder Vance had heard this refusal, she told him to return to his world and attacked him with a fiery dagger. Thrown back by the blazing protective field, the sheep threatened to grind the monster into dust, but he calmly turned around and, engulfed in tongues of flame, threw over his shoulder that they would regret this. Carried away by his father, Jason continued to furiously emit hostile energy. Feeding on his former rival and angry at his humiliating position, he showed Chris the finger with both hands. Once the monsters were gone from the arena, Vanessa told her mother that they needed to be nicer to the boy when they got home. Holywell sarcastically asked the judge why he was not declaring him the winner, but was playing the fool in his workplace. However, Amelia, putting the blade back into the hollow between her breasts, said that she should rather worry about her own safety, since a 9th-level demon was able to get into the arena, which meant that she needed to leave immediately, since it was not safe to be here. Suddenly, it was announced that the competition was suspended and buses guarded by armed men in uniform arrived to pick up the children. A frustrated Chris realized that the games were suspended because the event's administration did not want Satan's son to win. But Susie, who came up from behind, assured that the organizers had always been like this. Chris was surprised when the dog's sisters came up to him, and one of them explained that they were leaving too, but Susie made everyone thank the one-horned one for all his help and say goodbye to him. And Susie herself said that she noticed that Chris was actually good at heart, no matter what he said, which greatly confused the demon. Then Susie unexpectedly hugged him tightly, which completely stunned him. Having reached the bus with Chris, Susie said goodbye to him and the sisters got on theirs. Watching the bus take the older dog away, Chris seemed to have gone into a trance and slowly looked down at his palm, trying to come to terms with the realization that he had hugged Susie. Already sitting on his bus taking him home, the main character continued to reflect on the meaning of Jason's father's phrase about what he would have to regret. Suddenly, the bus shook violently, causing general panic. Looking out, the one-horned man saw a huge fox, seemingly made of tongues of flame. The men in uniform immediately gave instructions to the bus driver to immediately take the children to a safe place. They also ordered everyone to prepare for battle and defense while the relief army reached the scene. After some time, it was announced that an emergency stop had been made in a safe place. However, the children were still terrified. Some even tried to hide under the seats. The staff escorted them off the bus one by one, after which they began to line up and prepare for defense, since in the event of an enemy attack, the steel gates of the shelter would not hold. At this point, the one-horned man asked to be let through to the bus driver to settle a personal matter, but the staff did not want to let him through, saying that the solution to all problems should be postponed until the current situation was finally resolved. Then Chris said that his question was an order of magnitude more important. The driver came out to the one-horned man and asked what he had. The son of Satan quickly pierced the driver's stomach, asking why he hated him so much. Chris didn't understand why a stranger felt such strong hatred towards him. The shocked military ordered the heir of the devil to immediately release the driver, threatening to open fire. Suddenly, the driver's face changed and an evil grin appeared on it, and he himself turned into a huge six-armed purple monster, with a mouth more like a meat grinder than a normal mouth. But before he could do anything, he fell dead, because the one-horned one had already absorbed his power, and the admiring military praised Chris. Halliwell was trying out a new ability when one of the soldiers asked him how he recognized the fake driver, to which the brunette, quite pleased with himself, replied that the system constantly gave him windows with hatred when there was only a pseudo-driver nearby. After a couple of seconds, they realized that they had to run, since the demon driver had deliberately led them into a trap. But the fleeing military and Chris came across a huge fire dragon from the realm of the dead, eating lower demons. The one-horned man, who had already seen a lot, was shocked once again. The dragon, who also noticed those who had arrived, dropped the half-eaten demon from his mouth and released streams of flame from his nostrils. And the next second, he let loose a huge volley of fire, almost hitting the main character, who managed to jump away. The enraged dragon chased after Halliwell, trying to roast him like a grilled chicken. Seeing a bus ahead, the one-horned one jumped back, and the clumsy dragon, who did not have time to react, crashed into the cold, hard metal at full speed. The delighted disciples praised their savior. The dragon's hostile energy continued to grow, and the protagonist decided to take advantage of the great opportunity. He rejoiced. It seemed as if the devil himself was helping him with his own hands. The satisfied demon pounced on the dragon. In a matter of seconds, the one-horned one tore the enemy to shreds. Even well-trained military personnel were shocked by what was happening. Suddenly, the radio announced that a city of dogs had been attacked and that help was needed. Still holding the pieces of the recently alive dragon in his hands, Chris rushed to the radio. Having learned that dogs in the city needed help, he snatched the device from the soldier's hand and rushed headlong to help the sisters, leaving the soldiers completely bewildered. Meanwhile, in the city of dogs, two pretty and busty demonesses were wondering why they were sent here. Having been forbidden to kill anyone, they had to kidnap Chris because he's a strong warrior. Chris suddenly ran into the pink-haired demoness and fell face down into the hollow between her large hemispheres. Having accidentally knocked her down, the alarmed protagonist tried to catch her as she fell. After making sure that both girls were standing firmly on their feet, he introduced himself as a messenger of the devil from his vicinity and handed the second demoness a piece of dragon scale. The one he crashed into immediately fell in love with his beauty and began to look after him with care and asked if he was okay, after which she hugged him and invited him to join the squad with them. Chris agreed, and she immediately took him away, saying that he could call her little sister, completely not even noticing that she had left her companion far behind. Meanwhile, Susie tried to reassure her sisters that someone would definitely come for them soon and save them. Suddenly, somewhere very close to her, a painfully familiar voice sounded, asking if his puppies were here. A second later, Chris appeared on the other side of the bars, covered in traces of the demon sister's lipstick. A stunned Susie asked him if he was really in league with these demons. At that moment, the pink-haired girl came up from behind, and with a sly grin noted that her new brother had already found his girlfriend. Susie froze as if struck by lightning, and then furiously attacked the one-horned man, finding out what he had told his new girlfriends. But he covered her mouth with his hand, which stunned her even more. He had an earphone hidden in his hand, and he himself told Susie that he was not the one to help her. The delighted demoness approached Chris and took him by the elbow, smugly throwing to the dog sisters that they were not up to the level of her chosen one. Hugging the pink-haired girl, the son of Satan thanked her. The youngest sister was extremely outraged by the words of Chris's demonic little sister, while Susie froze in place. She pulled the earpiece Halliwell had placed in her mouth, surprised that he had snuck in here just for them. Holding it to her ear, Susie heard the military radio conversations deciding which squad should enter from which side, and suddenly the negotiators noticed an extra channel. Then the dog calmed them down, explaining that Chris had pretended to be a demon and had secretly given her the earphone. Meanwhile, the two 6th and 4th level demons were giving orders to the lower ones to attack the beastmen. While listening to them, Chris was simultaneously thinking about a plan to obtain new energy, and he raised his hand as one of the first among those wishing to go on the mission. The chief of them, a 6th level bone demon, praised the volunteers and promised them a generous reward. The strongest demons, even those without human form, and Chris along with them separated from the crowd and went to carry out the order. Chris was thrown to the coordinates given to the main demons, and he fell to the ground with a thud. A battle of demons broke out, from which the one-horned one decided to safely escape. The demon's opponents rushed to attack. Chris, who was running away at that moment, noted that only real idiots could sign up for something like that. Hiding in some room, the son of Satan was very pleased with himself, but he immediately became sad, realizing that there was no one nearby who could help him. Suddenly he heard the sound of a chain and turned around in fear to check who was in the room besides him. Behind him, with her arms and legs spread out and a gag in her mouth, a blonde demoness was suspended. Realizing who had scared him, Chris waved his hand awkwardly, smiled tensely, said that he was leaving now, and backed away. Hearing the girl's diligent mooing, the one-horned man sat down next to her and asked if she wanted to say something. Having received an affirmative answer, the guy hit the captive on the forehead with his finger and sarcastically remarked that he was not going to listen to her. He matter-of-factly noted that he loved silence. Voices came from behind the door, saying that the captive needed to be checked, and upon hearing this, the guy swore. Starting to run my eyes around the room in search of shelter, two large men with guns entered the room. Listening to their conversations, Chris, hanging on the ceiling, decided that he should not get involved in all this, so as not to be accidentally killed by Monica. As Halliwell's fingers began to slide over the dents they had made in the ceiling, he realized more and more clearly that he couldn't hold out like this for much longer. When the inspectors were already leaving, the demon felt that things were really bad. Having fallen down, he managed to land effectively so as not to fly head over heels. He cursed again, trying to figure out what to do next. Chris once again angered and embarrassed another girl by squeezing one of her breasts with his left hand. The enraged girl moaned loudly again, to which Halliwell began to scold her, demanding that she finally shut up, but he immediately stopped short, realizing that he was making too much noise. At that very second, two of the prisoner's guards burst into the door in response to the sounds, and they saw a sitting one-horned man whose left hand was still lying on the demoness's chest. A moment later, the guy was already behind them. Without thinking twice, the brunette slammed their heads together with all his might, knocking them both out. The girl with a gag in her mouth and tears in her eyes was still mumbling something. Turning to her, the protagonist asked if she wanted to say anything else or not. She nodded, and taking pity, Chris pulled the spiky ball out of her mouth. Having the opportunity to speak, the blonde almost screamed that she was a demon with boiling blood, and the brunette simply had to save her. He didn't believe her, and the indignant girl said that her guards could confirm her identity, and also that only demons with such a feature have V-shaped horns. Smiling, the one-horned man asked what use he could get from the demoness he had come across, to which she replied, a little embarrassed, that this time the enemies were just lucky to catch her, and suggested that Chris work together, adding that in the past, demons like him were not even worthy of bringing her slippers. But these words produced exactly the opposite effect to what she had expected, because the brunette suddenly grabbed her by the throat with his hand. He said with a smile that the blonde had aroused his curiosity and reminded him that demons gain abilities by eating their own kind. The stunned demoness bared her fangs, screaming for him to let her go immediately, but then he was called from behind. The rest of the demons sent on the mission, like the one-horned one, came for the prisoner. The skeleton demon decided to attack the brunette, but he quickly protected himself from the attack, after which he added, holding the blonde in his arms, that he had merely adjusted her loose necklace, which greatly puzzled the attacker. Taking the captive with one of 3 pairs of hands, the skeleton praised Chris for the find, after which all the demons headed towards the exit. Leaving the room where the girl was, one of the demons was targeted by someone. One precise shot hit the demon's body accurately, turning it into a bloody mush. The other demons were stunned by the sudden attack on their fellow. The entire small procession of demons was targeted by the guns of an entire detachment of soldiers. Having created the armor, one of the demons began to advance, distracting the military while Chris and the others ran in the opposite direction. The brunette, with his super speed, overtook even the demon carrying the blonde. Suddenly, the demons were attacked by huge elephants with red eyes, pumped-up muscles, and blades in their paws. The discouraged skeleton demon released the blonde from his tenacious hands, but Hallowell deftly caught the girl, and he carried her into the opened portal, leaving the almost defeated demons to be torn apart by their enemies. With his last strength, the half-dead skeleton crawled to the one-horned man, begging him to help him and promising to ask for a reward for him. However, the unperturbed brunette crushed the demon's skull with one movement of his foot. With a sly smile, he added that he would ask for a nicer coffin for the demon. But remembering the chase, the guy turned around and armed warriors were running after him. Then he decided that it was time for him to get out of there. Coming out on the other side of the portal, he greatly surprised the strongest of the demons. The enraged 6th-rank skeleton began to rudely ask where his skeleton nephew and the other demons were. With a saddened expression and tears in his eyes, Chris said that the skeleton demon had died heroically in battle. The deceased's uncle couldn't believe it at first and asked again if it was true, but immediately replacing the sorrow on his face with malice, the one-horned man answered with a laugh that this was, of course, a joke. And in fact, that demon had first lost his leg, and before his death he looked very pitiful, begging Chris to help him. The deceased's uncle burst into flames and became enraged. At that moment, the blonde woke up and all the demon's attention switched to her. Getting up from the floor, she asked who the hero was who saved her so that she could reward him. With an awkward smile on his face, the devil's son raised his hand and responded. The demoness was horrified to see that he was her savior. Falling to the floor, she screamed in despair. But the brunette quickly stopped the sonic attack on his eardrums, hitting the girl between the eyes with the edge of his palm. The skeleton in the cloak was horrified by what happened. At that very moment, bats flew into the room with bad news that people had activated teleports and were already heading straight to the demonic lair. While the stunned company of demons tried to come up with a plan of action, Chris, standing to the side, was mentally glad that the sisters were already free. The chief in the cloak gave the order to retreat to another headquarters and ordered the one-horned man to carry the freed woman, warning that he would be responsible for her with his head. Hallowell assured him that everything would be done in the best possible way, mentally deciding that now, when the battle was reaching its peak, there was not a minute more to lose. Throwing the girl over his shoulder, he pointed the demons in the direction to run. The one-horned man ran into some building and slammed the door behind him, disappearing there along with the important skeletal demoness.